Why people lose interest. Have you ever loved someone deeply, and then one day, without any fight, without any dramatic moment, you just felt nothing? Or maybe you were on the other side. Maybe someone who used to call you every night stopped calling altogether, and you kept asking yourself the same question over and over: what did I do wrong? Or worse, was I ever really loved at all? Today we're going to talk about something that almost nobody explains properly. We're going to talk about why people lose interest, not because they're cruel, not because they're shallow, but because of how the human heart and mind actually work. And I want to warn you, some of this is going to be uncomfortable, because the truth about love is never as simple as we want it to be. We grow up believing that love is a destination, that once you find the right person and they love you back, that feeling stays, that it's permanent, that it's real. But the science of human emotion tells a very different story. Feelings are not permanent. In fact, feelings are some of the most temporary things that exist inside us. They shift, they evolve, they respond to context, to routine, to time, to fear, to growth. Losing interest isn't always a choice. Most of the time, it's not even something people see coming. It creeps in quietly, like a fog, until one day someone looks at the person lying next to them and realizes the warmth they once felt has gone cool. That's not a love story ending in betrayal. That's a human story about how the brain works and what we can learn from it. The neuroscience of attraction and why it fades. Let's start with the brain, because that's where love actually lives. When you first fall for someone, your brain is flooded with chemicals. Dopamine, the pleasure chemical; norepinephrine, which makes your heart race; serotonin, which becomes so disrupted that you literally can't stop thinking about that person. This is the limerence phase, sometimes called the honeymoon phase, and it is chemically similar to a mild addiction. But here's what nobody tells you. That phase has a biological shelf life. Research suggests the neurochemical rush of early romantic love typically lasts anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. After that, the brain begins to normalize. The dopamine spikes settle. The obsessive thinking quiets. The intensity softens. For some couples, what replaces the chemical rush is something deeper: attachment, trust, security, partnership. That transition from passionate love to companionate love is actually healthier and more sustainable. But for others, when the rush fades, they confuse the absence of excitement for the absence of love. They think, I don't feel butterflies anymore. Maybe I chose the wrong person. And so they leave, not because love was absent, but because they didn't recognize what love looks like after it matures. Familiarity, boredom, and the paradox of closeness. There's a painful paradox at the heart of intimacy. The closer you get to someone, the less mysterious they become. And the human brain is wired to be attracted to novelty, to the unknown, to the not yet revealed. This is called habituation. When something becomes familiar and predictable, our brain stops releasing the same chemical rewards it once did. It's the same reason a song can move you to tears the first time and feel like background noise 6 months later. The song didn't get worse. You just adapted. In relationships, this can feel devastating. The person who once made you feel electric now just feels ordinary. But here's what's important to understand. Ordinary is not the enemy of love. It's the foundation of it. The problem is when ordinary becomes stagnant, when two people stop growing together, when comfort turns into complacency. Interest doesn't die because two people know each other too well. Interest dies when two people stop creating new versions of themselves to share with each other. The couples who stay fascinated with each other for decades are not people who were born compatible. They're people who kept evolving individually and together. The role of unmet needs and emotional disconnection. Sometimes losing interest isn't about boredom. It's about pain. When someone repeatedly feels unseen, unheard, or unvalued in a relationship, they don't always fight. Sometimes they withdraw. Slowly, quietly, they begin to build walls. They stop reaching for their partner. They stop sharing the small moments of their day. They stop trying. This is called emotional withdrawal, and it often precedes the death of interest by months or even years. By the time one person says, "I think I've lost feelings," the disconnection started long before that moment. It could have been ignored arguments that were never resolved, needs that were expressed but dismissed, vulnerability that was met with indifference, the slow erosion of feeling safe enough to be fully present with another person. Psychologist John Gottman calls the behaviors that accelerate this erosion the four horsemen: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. When these patterns dominate a relationship, emotional connection doesn't just suffer, it collapses. And once the emotional bridge is broken, interest, real, deep interest, has very little left to stand on. Section 5. Personal growth, identity shifts, and growing apart. Here's one of the most honest and least talked about reasons people lose interest. They change, and their partner doesn't change with them, or they change in a direction that takes them further from each other rather than closer. We are not the same people at 30 that we were at 22. Our values shift, our priorities deepen, our wounds heal, or they don't, and we carry them differently. Our ambitions evolve. Our understanding of what we need from love becomes more refined. Sometimes two people who were perfectly matched at one chapter of life find themselves strangers by the next chapter, not because anyone failed, but because life is a journey, and not every companion is meant to walk every road with you. This kind of growing apart is one of the quietest and most heartbreaking forms of losing interest, because there's no villain in the story. There's just two people who loved each other sincerely, who were changed by life, and who eventually realized they were no longer going the same direction. Acknowledging this doesn't make the loss smaller, but it does make it more human. Section 6. Fear, avoidance, and the person who pulls away. Not everyone loses interest because they stopped caring. Some people lose interest because they started caring too much, and it terrified them. Attachment theory tells us that people with an avoidant attachment style are wired to associate intimacy with danger. Not physical danger, but emotional danger. The threat of loss, of rejection, of being consumed or controlled by love. So when a relationship starts to deepen, when it starts to become real and significant, something in them panics. And instead of running forward, they pull back. They become distant. They nitpick. They start to notice flaws they didn't notice before. They convince themselves they're not that interested because disengagement feels safer than surrender. If you've ever been on the receiving end of this, if you've watched someone you love slowly disappear without explanation, know this: their pulling away was rarely about you. It was about their own fear of what love demands. And if you recognize this in yourself, if you've ever sabotaged something beautiful because vulnerability felt like too high a price, that's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to understand and to heal. What do we do with all of this? So where does that leave us? Losing interest is real. It happens to good people in good relationships. It is not always a sign of failure, and it is not always the end of a story that deserved to continue, but it is always worth examining. Before you walk away from someone, or before you accept that someone has walked away from you, ask the harder questions. Did we stop creating new experiences together? Did one of us stop feeling safe enough to be vulnerable? Is this really a loss of interest, or a loss of connection that could be rebuilt? Did we grow apart, or did we simply stop choosing each other? Sometimes the honest answer is, it's over. Sometimes the honest answer is, we got lazy. And sometimes the honest answer is, we never really loved the person. We loved the idea of them. Whatever the answer is, I hope you find the courage to face it. Because the only thing worse than losing love is not understanding why and repeating the same patterns with the next person and the one after that, wondering why it always ends the same way. You deserve to understand yourself, and you deserve the kind of love that keeps choosing you. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but deliberately, consciously, over and over again. Thank you for watching. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today. And if you're in the middle of a loss right now, you're not alone. You never were.